OTAs is in full swing. Last week on Risers and Fallers, we talked about a lot of veterans that are moving up and down draft boards. Today, we are going to solely focus on the rookies in OTAs and talk about which guys are rising and falling with Chuck Bass on Player Profiler. So, Chuck, we're in full swing of OTAs, right? I don't usually put too much stock into OTAs, but it is always nice. Football is right around the corner. We get a little bit of a taste, but obviously training camp is most important, but there are a lot of overreactions to some of the news that does come out in OTAs, especially with a lot of these rookies. Do you put a lot of stock into OTAs? Is it really just something to pass the time because you're just dying for training camp to get here? How
Mhm.
much stock do you put into it?
It's really just to confirm any biases I have for or against players. If a bunch of beat reporters are for a player that I love, I look at it as indicative proof these guys are getting paid thousands and thousands of dollars a year to report the truth. If there's negative reports coming out, I just say it's OTAs and these guys, they've never been right about anything. It's all about hubris, and that's the name of the game in early June.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to put it is like it's really about confirming priors. If a guy I really like looks good, I'm like, yeah, there we go.
That's
That
right.
starts to get you jazzed up a little bit. But then
Oh
if a
yeah.
guy you don't like, there's not a lot of news on him, or
Mm.
Travis Hunter maybe not running the cleanest routes. It's like, hey, it's early, man. Like
Yeah.
he's a great athlete. He'll be fine. So,
Hype
but
season.
yeah, exactly. But let's jump into the first player. It's going to be Dylan Sampson. He gets drafted to the Cleveland Browns with the 4.24 pick overall. And this is a guy that enters a room with Quinshawn Judkins, who the team spent heavy draft capital on as well. He's RB 45. He's 196, and he's down 14 spots in the last week per underdog best ball ADP. Is there anything that points to that, Chuck? Anything that you've heard or you're thinking might be a reason why he might be falling?
No, I really don't. I think maybe this is just more people coming to the table right now and seeing the Browns taking Judkins at the 36th overall pick and going draft capital, traditionally run heavy team, quarterbacks suck, all that stuff that makes sense. However, for Sampson to be falling in particular, I don't really, that one doesn't track as much. I really get like early Jamal Williams, Aaron Jones vibes from this backfield. I think that the to take Judkins second round and then to take Sampson in the fourth, I think that's as clear as day as what you're going to get from what this team wants to do. I'm having trouble seeing any scenario where Judkins, with how inept this quarterback room is going to be, and an offensive line that did rank near the bottom in most categories last year, that he's going to be a traditional workhorse. They brought in some vets in free agency, but they all have as much risk as they do upside at the offensive line, that is. And I say all that to say Sampson just feels like a value play here for me. Judkins is a big, violent back that finds holes and runs over dudes. That's a good thing to be able to do in the NFL and can lead to a long career. I just wonder how much impact he's going to have this year when he's going to be working with probably less talent than he did when he was at Ohio State. Sampson is the opposite kind of player, right? He's shifty, explosive, highlight reel guy, can make guys miss in the open space instead of just trying to get defenders to, meet their medical deductibles.
When I think about this room, I get the vibe. Are we going to see maybe the Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb
Mhm. Yeah.
duo that we saw in 2020, where 196 touches for Kareem Hunt, 841 yards, 3 touchdowns, but he was more of the guy in the receiving game, and that was 3 touchdowns on the ground.
Yep.
And then you have Nick Chubb, who had actually less touches, but more yards, 1,067 and 12 total touchdowns. I think the other elephant in the room is look, Jerome Ford is still there.
Mm.
I'm not, going to sit here and tell you that Jerome Ford is going to, shock the nation and end up being a really dependable back. He's a $3 million cap hit, right? Could he be a cap casualty, right? That Deshaun Watson deal, I know they restructured, but I'm sure Cleveland's looking for any way that they can save some money. And
Yeah.
if Dylan Sampson ends up looking really good in camp, maybe there's a world where they do try to go save some money and move on from Jerome Ford. I don't really care for Sampson too much in redraft. I'll have some slight exposure to him, in best ball, but
Yeah.
I think the case for Sampson is really just I think that it's just the market correcting itself from a lot of rookie hype. 14
Mhm.
spots is a lot to drop down, but I'm looking at some of the guys that were around him, where he was up 14 spots from where he is now. And it's a lot of veterans, right? You have like Will Shipley, right? Maybe people are buying into him being the RB2 there.
Yeah.
Sam Darnold, actually. So some guys, some veterans are just getting pushed back up, and the market seems
Mhm.
to just be correcting itself.
Yeah, and it's very strange that you get like an exact one for one to where, we had the Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb tandem. It's the same coaching staff and they drafted two backs that profiler very similarly to those two players. Usually it's like a new staff or players that don't meet the profile. This is like a one for one. And Chubb was the best I've seen in a decade at between the tackles and getting to the second level. Judkins isn't really that good, and they were working with one of the better lines at the time. I just think that there's going to be room for the RB2 in this offense to get those 150 to 175 touches that Kareem Hunt was getting. He wasn't always terribly productive with them because he was getting older. He was a little hurt, but he was still getting the opportunity. And this is when Chubb was in his prime. So I'd rather take the bet that Sampson finishes maybe 12, 15 spots above ADP than Judkins finishes near his peers, which are, if you're looking at just the data right now where he's being drafted, Alvin Kamara, James Conner, David Montgomery, that's where he's going right now, and that's just a little for me.
Yeah, I think he's going in that range of. I think the market's telling us they think he's going to get a workhorse, a workhorse role in this
Yeah.
offense. The offensive coordinator did come out recently, earlier this week, and say that he's getting early 2020 vibes, 2021, where it's going back to ground and pound, in that their offense specifically. Do I think they're going to commit to the run? Absolutely. Do I think they're going to be very good at it or effective? Maybe not so much. But the commitment, I think, will be there, especially with all these quarterbacks they brought into the room.
Yeah.
But let's move on to Jaylin Noel. He's the next player on this list. He's been falling 10 spots. He's wide receiver 79. Total ADP is 188 on Best Ball Underdog. And all reports for Jaylin Noel have actually been pretty positive. I've heard some good reports about Christian Kirk as well. So maybe it's the market, getting worried that Christian Kirk, who I think if Kirk is healthy, is going to be a very good producer for fantasy. But the health is really the biggest factor here,
Mm.
Chuck. They brought in Christian Kirk via trade. They did bring in two wide receivers, Jaden Higgins and Jaylin Noel from the same school. But injuries could hold Kirk back and open up some runway for Jaylin Noel to slide right into that slot role, because I don't think Tank Dell is going to be back this year either. And even if he is, I don't think he's going to be very good. What are your thoughts on Jaylin Noel at this price, wide receiver 79? In
Mm.
best ball, maybe more exposure, but redraft, is that a guy that you're willing to take a chance on?
Yeah, this one, and you really came out the gate swinging with us. Some the stories from Texans camp, and like not to confirm my priors, but they've all been saying that he has been the standout rookie so far, and that he just looks pro ready. He's working hard. Every coach has been talking about him at their press conferences. Um, And you just look at what this Texans team wants to do, right? They always want to have one or two guys that can perform a certain role. Now, they brought in a new offensive coordinator. I think he's going to be good. I think he's going to be improvement over Bobby Slowick. But that Tank Dell role that clearly is valuable to CJ Stroud, it's going to be between Tank Dell, or it's going to be between Noel and Christian Kirk. I think they bring in Kirk and they draft Jaylin so that they always have at least one of these guys that can work underneath, that can work in the slot, and can get those short yardage opportunities. You've got Higgins and Nico who are going to dominate on the sides. And, they brought in Stephon Diggs because they needed somebody to step up in that, Robert Woods, John Mechie role, just to always have two valuable weapons on the field at all times. And when it comes to Kirk specifically, Kirk's a tricky one. That Tank Dell role, which was really valuable, if before Tank Dell went through generational physical trauma over the last 2 years, we're talking fracturing his fibula, being shot, and then destroying every ligament in his knee. But before that happened, and before Diggs showed up, it was actually a pretty valuable role to have in this Texans offense. Stroud had real instant connection with him early on. 4 wide receiver 1 finishes in his first 8 games in 2023. Not a huge sample size, but it does show the roadmap for what a player who's a talented route runner and separator in those short and intermediate areas can do. So they trade for Kirk. We've seen that Kirk can produce when he's playing well, when he's healthy. But the thing with him is He has missed 16 games over his last 2 seasons, which you alluded to when you were talking about it. And those are from separate injuries. He did already look to be the odd man out last year in a Jaguars offense that really needed production outside of BTJ. I just don't buy that they traded a 7th-round pick for him because he's going to be a factor. I think they're hoping Noel wins out. And if not, they at least are going to be able to rotate these guys in some way. I would be surprised if he ran away with the job.
Yeah, I guess I look at Christian Kirk, and I think health is what holds me back the most with him. I think he's going to be involved in the offense. Reason being is if you look at Player Profiler, their best comparable player to Christian Kirk is Stephon Diggs. Ironically, right?
Hmm.
They're guys that profile are very similar, and Stephon Diggs averaged 15 points per game in this role last season before getting hurt, right? And
Hmm.
so the fact that they're very similar skill sets, I think Christian Kirk is still a guy. It's not like he's coming off of like a very, very bad injury from last year either. He was just banged up. But when you look at the yards per route run, even, Stephon Diggs, 1.84 yards per route run last year. Christian Kirk, 1.71 yards per route run. A lot of them were both almost exclusively used underneath and in the intermediate, which is if Kirk is healthy, I think he'll be used that way. And
Hmm.
for Jaylin Noel, I think Jaylin Noel could be a field stretcher, which actually gives him some more flexibility where even if Kirk is available, do we see him on the field with Kirk and maybe sometimes Jade Higgins
Hmm.
off to the side? I think it's very possible. I think it's a cloudy, murky wide receiver room that I'm
Yeah.
not super interested in buying really anybody outside of Higgins. Now that I mean, I'm sorry, outside of Nico Collins,
Hmm.
unless we get some really good reports from Kirk that he looks really good in camp, and when redraft season really starts. And I also think we're talking about a lot of guys that are very far down the board. It really depends again, and I'll say it multiple times probably today. It depends on your bench sizes, right? If I'm in a league
Hmm.
where it's a 14-man league and I have like 7 bench spots, like yeah, I might take a chance on Jaylin Noel, right? Where if I'm in a 12-man league where I'm only getting 6 bench spots, yeah, Noel is likely going to be undrafted, and I wouldn't advocate for taking a swing on him unless you're really chasing upside.
Hmm.
But you'd have to also understand that we talk about like everyone wants to say, I'll add the guy that has the upside on the bench. But when you get to week 6, Chuck, and buys start to happen and injuries start to happen, and this guy has not really been on the field much, you're likely dropping him, right? You can't hold on to some of these
Yeah.
guys forever. There's always going to be a rubber meets the road point in the middle of the season. And I worry about a guy like Noel like that, where how quickly will he be involved enough? And will it be enough to say, okay, I'm willing to hold on to him for when the time comes, because Collins and Christian Kirk have both had issues staying healthy.
Sure. And that's where the price tag is going to be beneficial, right? I mean, they are not too far from each other in price, but this is a team that if one of these guys doesn't run away from the job, you're just going to want to stay away from because they always seem to find a way. I alluded to Mechie, I alluded to Woods, Xavier Hutchinson at times. They've had a hodgepodge at the wide receiver position. My hope is that they drafted these 2 guys at Iowa State to kind of, bring some stability so they can always have the same 3 or 4 guys out on the field. And I just like for one of these guys to potentially win the job and to, you look at who they're going around, Wan'Dale Robinson, Romeo Dobbs, Xavier Legette, I think that there could be maybe, wide receiver 30, wide receiver 34, which would be 200% return on ROI if by the time September rolls around, we know what this is going to look like.
Yeah, we probably. I got some interesting feelings on Wandell Robinson, where I actually happen to like him, but we'll
Yeah.
save that for another show.
Yeah,
But
please.
let's go ahead and listen to a word from the Podfather.
Let's face it, most people that play fantasy, they don't play DFS, they don't play big best ball tournaments. Why? Because it's too complicated and they feel like they can't win. And that's why we developed the Fast Draft Flex 4 game. You just draft any 6 guys, the top 4 enter your lineup every week. So if you love Garrett Wilson, you think he's going to outscore Tyreek Hill, or you love Brees Hall, and you think he's going to outscore Devon Achane because you're a big Jets fan, if you're right, you will make money. You don't need to be running big data models. You don't need to be soaked in strategy and understand the schedule forwards and backwards. That's the beauty of Flex 4. Sure, those with great strategy win more money, but those that have strong takes on players can also go out and monetize those positions. And the beauty is it's just $5 a draft, just $5. You can draft 150 times and the winner gets 10 grand. So use your host promo code to get a $50 deposit match. So when you deposit, use that promo code, and then you get $50 on me. Because Flex 4 is a whole new way to play best ball.
So the next player we're going to talk about is Luther Burden, who is our final faller that we will discuss today. Burden is down 4 spots. He's got a whopping 72 ADP price tag. He's wide receiver 39, and this is a guy, Chuck, who is likely the wide receiver 3 in his offense, maybe even wide receiver 4 if you're counting Loveland or Cole Kmet in the offense. But right now, Burden is likely falling because he does have a soft tissue injury that he has been sidelined for the first block of OTAs, and the return timeline is pretty unsure right now. I'm not saying it's something major. It's something to monitor, but guys start to see rookies get injured already, and and you hear soft tissue, and you say, is this going to be a problem for this guy? Is he going to be a guy that has these soft tissue injuries? Whatever. Like, it's not something you want to hear, which makes sense as to why he's falling just a little bit right now, 4 spots to wide receiver 39 and an ADP is 72.
Yeah, I just want to say before we dive into this, he's wearing number 87, which is like it makes me want to love the guy so much and just give him the benefit of the doubt and root for him. He's holding on to the long story tradition of keeping it in that, the 80s. So shout out Luther Burden. You wouldn't expect that when you see how this guy plays. So he's the man. All right. I guess I can see why he's falling. It does make sense, especially with everything you just said, combined with you see how on the same page Caleb Williams seems to be with DJ Moore and Rome Odunze, whether it's the videos that have been coming out, the press conferences, the way the players talk. I liked this pick for the Bears for a few reasons, but not many of them had to do with 2025. Just yesterday, and that is June 3rd. DJ Moore forgot Luther Burden's name in a press conference when he was talking about their young pass catchers. I mean, it's just not what you want. I see the vision. I think they're going to try and use him like a Jaden Reed type, but how Jaden Reed didn't really have anybody to compete with week to week other than Tucker Kraft for serious targets. Burden could be the 5th guy in this offense when you bring in, you factor in Loveland, factor in Kmet, whatever they end up doing with the run game, we have no idea. So, I know Reed, didn't have much of competition. It seemed to be a problem for him sometimes last year, but that's a whole nother thing. What I like about him is he's a freak, right? He's an absolute freak on the field, and I can't confirm it, but he's probably a freak off the field too. And he just brings an element to this offense that they don't have. It's what Ben Johnson had with Jameson Williams. They just move different. He just moved differently than the rest of the guys. Rome and Moore are traditional wide receivers in their X and Y roles. Keenan Allen took the 16th most slot snaps of any wide receiver last year, and we saw what his lovable but dusty ass was able to do against these corners at times. New scheme coming in, but it's an upgraded scheme. Caleb Williams clearly had a favor for, that role. I think it could be a good play at ADP. I just don't know how I feel about it personally yet.
Yeah, when I take a look at Luther Burden here, I've seen him actually be even farther down on some other sites for his ADP right now. I'm seeing him at like 94, which would be wide receiver 51. I think that's more of an appropriate price tag for him, borderline top 100 player. And I mean, to have 3 wide receivers on this Bears team inside the top 100 is pretty nuts, right? I think everyone's taking their bite out of the apple to take a chance to get a high target share, but we've seen it with DJ Moore, right? He's been a consistent 120 targets per season guy. We saw Rome Odunze last year, right? Pull 100 targets in. And look, the thing you can mention is Caleb Williams last year was able to support 3 wide receivers with 100 plus targets. Maybe there's some hope that they can do that again, but I really don't expect that. He was 7th in pass attempts last season with 562. Deep ball attempts, he was number 1. I just don't think that Ben Johnson, I think they saw what happened last year. He was throwing the ball way too much, and I don't think they want to put him in harm's way like that again. And then you also factor in Colson Loveland, who's also dealing with the shoulder, and there's no timeline as to when he's going to be back either. But as you alluded to, it's giving those guys like DJ Moore and Rome Odunze, who were with him his rookie season, more opportunity to continue to build that chemistry, which I'm sure they already were building even before Burden was drafted in this offseason. They probably were getting together. And there was a comment by DJ Moore where I know people are worried about the body language, but he went up to the press earlier this week. They asked him about it, and he said that he's making it a conscious effort, and I'm paraphrasing here, making it a conscious effort to make sure his body language is good. And if there is a problem, don't show it on the field. Go talk to
Yep.
his coach. And I think that's the right way to go about it. He said that there was one situation where his body language wasn't good and him and Ben Johnson nipped it in the butt. And that's a good sign of growth and maturity.
Yeah.
And I think it's a sign of a guy that's bought into what they're looking to do this season, which really makes me even more bullish on DJ Moore this season. So that's
Yeah.
really my take on Burden. Did you want to add anything else though in this wide receiver room?
No, I'm glad you talked about, that you gave us that anecdote, because I think that's really indicative of, I think the target consolidation on this team will be like it was in Detroit, to where Ben Johnson will be calling the shots. He wants a quarterback that'll execute what he needs to a T to get it to their best players. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, and Sam Laporta. I mean, they were the target consolidation. Hardly anybody else other than Gibbs got any targets last year, if it wasn't for injury or anything like that. So expect the top guys on this team to get the ball. I like Burden year 2, year 3, year 4, but this year, DJ Moore, Rumbadunze.
Yeah, and so let's go ahead and move on to our next guy. It's going to be Elijah Arroyo, tight end for the Seattle Seahawks. Was taken in the second round, Chuck, 2.18, so 18th pick overall in the second round. He's tight end 32 right now, up 3 spots to 225. So I mean, this is a guy that right now is people are taking with their last pick or their second to last pick in best ball. I will put it out there right now. He joins the room with Noah Fant, who I think the team likes as well. And I think has another 1 or 2 years on his deal. I'd have to check that, but he's a field stretcher. He adds another wrinkle to this offense. I don't expect much in this offense from him year 1 though. So I do have my concerns about Arroyo. And yeah, I mean, I think if you're building a best ball lineup and it's good to have volatility at the tight end position and guys that have wide ranges of outcomes. If you're not drafting a top end guy like a Kittle, a Bowers, and McBride, I go for guys like Arroyo at the end because his range of outcomes are very wide, right?
Yeah.
He's got athletic ability to pull off some big plays, but he's also got the ability to really only give you like 60 fantasy points this year. It's a very strong possibility as well.
It is. Noah Fant, like you said, he is in a contract year right now, but he's going to turn 28 in October. And I mean, you've seen what guys with this profile can do going into their late 20s, even in their early 30s. Evan Ingram just set the mold for kind of, what the projection can be. So I still think these guys have juice, especially when they haven't been run into the ground like Noah Fant has not. Arroyo is the guy I somehow have the most notes on of any of the players we're going to talk about today. And I think it's because if I close my eyes, I can see it. I'm not going to do it because I get stage fright when my eyes are closed, but I can see a high A dot. I can see deep crossers, end zone fades on 4th and 1. Chaos is about to be happening in Seattle, whether it's Sam Darnold playing the full season or playing most of the season and they mix in Milrow with packages. This offense is just going to be funny to me. JSN is great. He's more than a slot guy. He can do a little bit of everything. But then you could throw the next 7 pass catchers in a hat and pull them out, and I'll accept the order no matter what they are. Cup, MVS, Torrey Horton, Noah Fant, Bobo, and then, of course, Arroyo. So why not him? He's just kind of a slower version of DK Metcalf. And honestly, most people are a slower version of DK when he's topping out at full speed. I get it. He's a rookie tight end on a team that may or may not have a bad offensive line. So he's got that working against him. In best ball leagues, he's going, like you said, tight end 36, pick 2008. So he's basically the last pick in most of these drafts. I like betting on him to give you some spike weeks. We know Sam Darnold's going to take chances, and their intent is to give him the full season. So we'll see, if that's going to be the future or an experimental drug phase, whatever. The Saints in the Clint Kubiak offense last year had 140 targets go to the tight ends. Now, that may have been because almost every wide receiver spent most of the year in the infirmary, but he got them involved in creative ways and early and often in these drives. So I think he could bring that to Seattle. This is basically a bet against Noah Fant, which lately has been pretty good, but to start his career, and that is who Arroyo has a similar skill set to, is Noah Fant. He was the tight end 17, the tight end 11, the tight end 12. So if you're getting that out of Elijah this year, you're getting another huge return on investment. And I like that, especially if you think he can be the second or third target owner on this passing offense.
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting, it's when you look at Sam Darnold, it's really hard to go off of his history, because I mean he's had such a crazy ride of
Yeah.
being with the Jets, who were an absolute mess, who didn't really have much of a target at the tight end position. Going to Carolina, right? He fizzled out there. Then he took a back seat in San Francisco. Now he comes to the Vikings, right? With the Vikings, it's worth noting, TJ Hawkinson, this is a guy at the tight end position who only played 10 games last year. He was targeted 62 times by Sam Darnold last year. Sam Darnold is the quarterback in the Seattle offense, right? 62 times in 10 games. If he played a full 17 game season, you're looking at a guy who was getting 6 targets a game, right? So
Mhm.
7 times 6, we're looking at a guy, he probably would have been number one in targets on this team. I'm number two in targets on this team. And then I also look at the other tight ends in this offense from last year with Sam Darnold. Josh Oliver had 28 targets. John Mundent had 27 targets, right? So you had a total of Sam Darnold threw to the tight end position almost 110 to 115 times last year. And and if it was TJ Hawkinson for a full season, very likely that would have been about the number that he got, which is kind of
Mhm.
crazy to say. But again, to your point, is it Noah Fant or is it Elijah Arroyo?
Yeah.
I look at Noah Fant last year, route participation. He was number 10 of all tight ends last year. 73% of the time they used him, on the field. That AJ Barner, where people were kind of getting, could he be something, right?
Mhm.
Fant was on the field running routes. It's still the same coaching staff outside of the offensive coordinator and some slight changes. Now you're bringing Clint Kubiak, right? Kubiak might not be in love with Noah Fant. Maybe he prefers Arroyo, but I do have concerns about Arroyo being an impact player year one, just because, again, tight end, maybe things are changing. I think I need to see more data where, maybe these guys are coming in more pro ready. But Elijah Arroyo, he had a very, very strong senior season, but did not have a ton of college production outside of that due to the injuries that he sustained. But he was a really good prospect coming out of college, coming into college. And so, there is a world where maybe Arroyo is a guy that can produce. I'm not expecting a ton. Um, Again, best ball lineup, sure, but redraft wise, I'm likely not touching him in really any format. In any situation,
Yeah.
even in really deep leagues, I'm probably not putting him on. I'd rather go take a chance on Zach Ertz to give me a high floor, as a bench tight end if I'm going high upside with maybe a guy like a Tyler Warren.
Well, you're not there. You're not wrong there because Zach Ertz probably finished second on Commanders and targets again with their offseason. But the name to mention, and you dropped it right there, and all in with that is AJ Barner and how the team feels about him going into the year. Not because he's going to be a fantasy value, but because he is one of the best blocking tight ends in the league. And if that offensive line is going to continue to need help and they want to continue to implement these schemes that Kubiak is going to do, Barner is going to see a lot of the field and he's going to see probably early and often. And that's going to be an inhibitor for Fant and for Arroyo. So keep an eye on that as we round into this late summer. But if not, if we're hearing more of Elijah's name, if he's able to pick up some of these, tight end traits that a lot of the rookies struggle with, I like it there, but watch out for Barner.
Yeah, let's move on to Terrance Ferguson, tight end out of Oregon. He finds himself with the Los Angeles Rams. If you pay attention to me on social media, if you've watched some of my videos outside of maybe the Rise and Fallers, we did cover Terrance Ferguson, I think, on an earlier season video. I love Terrance Ferguson, right? He's tight end 30. He's up just one spot, 211 right now in best ball ADP. But I think it's worth noting there were recent reports where the team allegedly tried to trade up for a first round tight end in this year's draft. Last year, we saw them allegedly trying to trade up for a tight end with Brock Bowers. I think this team realizes that they need more juice at the tight end position. All reports said that they really, really liked Terrance Ferguson. I think it's a really, really good spot. And if we're looking at Ferguson and Arroyo, I would much rather take a chance on Ferguson. Recent reports from Stu Jackson on the Rams beat said Ferguson made the catch of the day a day or two ago in OTAs for a touchdown. Him and Stafford look like they're building some decent chemistry. And Tyler Higbee, for what it's worth, like he can be serviceable as an NFL tight end. But if Ferguson is going out there and showing out, I don't expect Higbee to be a guy that has a stranglehold on this starting position. And I think they had big plans for Ferguson in this offense, which is why they've tried so hard to add to this tight end room.
Yeah, this one's tricky for me because I agree with everything you just said, and yet I don't want 1 second of anybody on this team that isn't Puka Nacua or Devontae Adams, and that's not really shade on anybody as an
Well, what
individual
about Kyron
player.
Williams?
Pass catcher. Sorry, pass catcher. I love Kyron Williams for this year. So I know you're holding me to the fire on that one. So it's really tough. Les Snead came out and he said on camera that Ferguson will be the heir apparent to Tyler Higbee, which to me says absolutely nothing. Higbee never existed. He doesn't exist, and he will never exist. He's just, I don't know if he's a money laundering scheme or what, but he's riding off of a bunch of targets in 2021. And look, this team consolidated. I talked about target consolidation with the Bears. This team consolidates its touches to its elite players, and they should because it works. So you've got 2 elite wide receivers. You've got Kyron Williams. So if everybody plays or plays most of the games, Ferguson's not going to be top 2 in targets. He won't be the red zone dominant, and he might have to share time with Tyler Higbee. So somebody tell me I'm high. But I love this pick for Dynasty. I love this pick for year 3. But right now, it's just show me the track record of this working out when you already have this much talent in the situation.
Yeah, I think the funnel of targets in the offense is where the concern comes, right? I'm projecting, I'll say it here. I mean, I'm projecting Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua to both be top 15 wide
Yeah.
receivers in fantasy this season. So if that's the truth, right, then you probably want to assume that if how much value do other pass catchers in the offense have? What I will say is Puka Nacua last year, 106 targets. Cooper Kupp, 100 targets. That was in 11 and 12 games, right? Tutu Atwell, 62 targets. DeMarcus Robinson, 64. Let's just assume, let's just suck all those targets out and give them to Puka and Cooper Kupp, and they both have 160 and 170, right?
Yeah.
Which is obviously not going to happen. But in a perfect world, let's just take them and give that to them. You also have Tyler Johnson, who had 41 targets. He's no longer there anymore. Jordan Whittington looked like he could be like a sneaky upside guy, right? Like maybe he could be somebody to stash in Dynasty. And then really the tight end position wasn't utilized very much. Colby Parkinson had 49 targets last year, right? And then you had Tyler Higbee with 12. You had Hunter Long with 9. You had Davis Allen with 13, right? If we could assume that there's going to be 80 to 90 targets, right? I mean, let's assume Colby Parkinson's got 50, Higbee's got 12, and then you have, again, Allen with 13 and Hunter Long with 9. There's around 80 targets there,
Yeah.
right? If Ferguson ends up giving you 60 targets compared to Higbee, who comes in and grabs 20 or maybe 55, and, it's probably not a huge impact. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's not, but I want assets in an offense with Matt Stafford, in an offense that really, really wants to upgrade at the position. I think they've made it a point.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's a bad swing in best ball. But again, most of these guys are not going to be players that you are looking to pick up and draft. But Ferguson, in my opinion, should be on the radar at least to see how things go early on in the season. If he's
Yeah.
getting a lot of those routes run and getting majority of the work over Higbee, then I would be encouraged to maybe keep an eye on him later on in the year because he could get more involved actually as a pass catcher, especially if he's kind of taking on that starting role.
Yeah, and I will say, to be glass half full a little bit as well, Ferguson was one of, if not the most athletic tight ends in the draft. So who's the last tight end that went to a new team that already had 2 established target consolidated guys in a scheme that did not traditionally feature the tight end? Jonnu Smith. Now, Jonnu Smith was an eighth year breakout, but we saw what that offense was able to do when defenses had to worry about the run game, 2 very good pass catchers, and then you have a third guy that a smart offensive play caller was able to incorporate. Now, is that a lot to ask for a rookie tight end? Probably so, but I'm just trying to find ways that, McVay does get the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he hasn't had a tight end that's been able to do this before. Gerald Everett was probably the closest we're going to see as far as an athletic freak in a McVay offense, but this is the hardest one for me to envision so far.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. Look, I'm a big proponent of the tight end position, right? Unless you're getting the top guys, there's really not a big same with the quarterback position. If you're not getting the top guys, the points per game difference between, guys in the 10 spot in points per game
Yeah.
compared to guys in the 18th spot in points per game is 1, maybe 2 points per game difference. So again, Ferguson likely not a difference maker, but he's a guy that I would maybe keep an eye on to see how
Yeah.
involved he gets into the
If
offense,
you're going to tell
especially
me if you're going to tell me in 2 years that they have a Marvin Harrison Jr., Trey McBride scenario with Puka and Ferguson, I don't even have to blink thinking about how much I can envision that. So the path,
Yeah.
it's coming. It's just you be patient.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to our last guy here, Tahj Brooks, 6th-round pick, going to the Cincinnati Bengals. He finds himself in an offense that, features Chase Brown, who had a phenomenal year last year, coming off a very, very heavy workload. Tahj Brooks, I think, fits this scheme pretty well, though. He thrives off of outside runs. He is also a change of pace to Chase Brown, larger running back. Not a ton of new news from camp, but he is a slight riser. And I think a lot of times you're just going to find guys that once they're this deep down, which with Tahj Brooks, look, he is pretty far down in from an ADP standpoint. I think he's RB 72. He's going 232. So majority of the time he's not getting drafted, but I take him a lot of times in best ball, especially at the end of drafts. And I think there's usually a good amount of movement at this lower area, just because these are guys that a lot of times aren't even getting picked. So guys are picking their flavors at the end of drafts. And that's why there's sharper movement, higher, like stronger movement at the bottom of the board than there is more at the top.
Yeah, only 16 reps of the bench press for Tahj Brooks at 230. I don't know about that, man, but seriously, shout out to our first real handcuff on the list. That's what he is for me this year. He's a pretty, I don't know if high value handcuff is the word, because I think they'll probably go committee if something happens to Chase Brown, but he certainly would be the lead back in that committee, I would imagine, just when you look at, how far we've seen Zach Moss and Samaje Perine decline as far as their ability to run the ball, move the chains, all that stuff. So I don't really have a ton to say about him, just because I think you said it. Chase Brown is going to be the guy here. He's probably going to be the bell cow. You draft Books because I think you probably want to maybe grind out a few more of those early down runs, but to keep Brown from being overexposed and give fewer touches to Perine and to Moss. But he's a big boy, right? Like I said, he's 230, which sometimes can eat into the goal line work, but Brown converted 6 of 13 carries inside the 5 last year into touchdowns. That's pretty good. That's actually really good, especially for his size. So Player Profiler has him compared to Chase Edmonds, which normally would trigger me because Chase Edmonds lost me a fair amount of money. But he did have a moment there as the backup to David Johnson and Kenyon Drake early on in his Arizona career. But even then, we're talking about guys who typically get, maybe 80 touches or less in their roles. So if Brown goes down, that's what you're betting on this pick. I hate to do that, but when you look at where his ADP is, you're looking at dart throws at the end, talking about not a top 5 offense, probably a top 2 offense this year if everything goes right. I don't mind it.
When I think about both of these two, right, like I said, with Tahj Brooks, right, he's a guy that I've said it, but I think he has a clearer path to fantasy relevancy than Jarquez Hunter does. And I know that became a pretty hot topic. But what I would say about Zach Moss and the Chase Brown from last year is we saw these two in very split roles last year. Zach Moss, last season, right, he had 9 carries, 12, 12, 15, 9. Then he had 6, 6, and 5. Started to get banged up there, and then obviously had the neck injury, right? But there were targets for him, right? He had 3 targets, 4 targets in the last 2 games. He also had 6 and I mean, he topped up. He had 4 or more targets 5 times last year, and that's also when you conclude that Chase Brown also had in those games 3 targets in pretty much every single one, and even in week 8 he had 4, where Zach Moss also had 4 in week 8. So there is a world where this does become more of a split backfield. I'm not sitting here saying that I think Chase Brown is going to get the majority of the touches. It's likely more of a 70-30 split, in my opinion. But from an opportunity share standpoint, Chase Brown last year had 72% of the opportunity share. Do we see that again? I don't know. I think Chase Brown, 229 carries from last year. I think that comes down slightly, maybe looking at somewhere around like 180 to 190, but the targets and the receptions still stay up there pretty high, which he had 65 targets last year. I think there's a couple ways to look at this, Chuck. I look at this where when I handcuff backs, I actually prefer guys that, to handcuff behind guys that are in workhorse roles. I don't look for guys as much in split roles because to me, if if a guy's in a split role, right, and one of those guys in that split role goes down and the backup comes in and takes over that split in conjunction with the other guy, right, that's likely not going to be enough to produce for you. But if you go and look at Kyron Williams, right, and maybe this is a point to Jarquez Hunter, if Kyron Williams goes down and they run a workhorse role, Jarquez Hunter likely going to get maybe 80% of the touches
Yeah.
if he can beat out Blake Corum, right? So there's ways to look at it where if in one regard you could say he might have fantasy relevancy early, but it might not be much. It's just you see him getting involved. On the other hand, if he's not getting involved and it is a true workhorse role for Chase Brown, if Tahj Brooks can supplant himself as the running back too, Chase Brown's not a big dude. There is a possibility that a heavy workload could weigh on him, and maybe he gets hurt. And if that's the case,
Yeah.
Tahj Brooks could be the lead back if he goes down. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but Zach
Yeah.
Moss doesn't really scare me, and he restructured his deal. I think that's because there's a possibility that they could move on easier, and they want to tell him, hey, we'll give you a chance to compete with the rookies and the other guys in the room this year for the RB2 spot. But if it doesn't work out, it makes it easier for us to move on, and we won't hold you.
No, I mean, that's what happens every year with the 49ers and the Chiefs. If somebody goes down, they typically don't split carries. Maybe they'll go a month where they give a guy a trial and then try the next guy, but they give guys the rock, and it's regardless of their skill set, their profile, what have you. And that's kind of what you're hoping for with the Bengals, right? My main concern for him would be if something were to happen to Brown. This is a bottom third of the league run block win rate team. It's not a very there. That's why Brown is able to exceed, is because he's explosive, he's dynamic, he can get away from defenders. I would be worried that Brooks would struggle with just traditional run game action. I see they would probably do more shotgun. They'd probably commit to more, passing on short down, stuff like that. But that's just me speculating. I would imagine that to be the case, but they ran everybody back. And what did we talk about last week? I love when teams do absolutely nothing different other than just try what was pretty good last year on offense. Again, I'll bet on it.
We can go on and on. It's Tahj Brooks, right? I mean, this is not necessarily this is not a guy that's likely going to
Yeah.
impact anything, right? But overall, I think it's fine to take chances on guys like this at the end of best ball drafts, right? I'm looking to get exposure. Same thing to your point with the 49ers. You could look like at the Eagles. If you think Will Shipley's in a situation where Will Shipley could be the number 2 back, right? Saquon goes down with all those carries from last year. If you think there's a possibility, then he could be a good guy to target as well. But that's going to do it for us, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.